Every Halloween, adults and children take on the guise of monsters, and one of the most beloved and iconic is the witch. Now, when you hear that term, I think a very specific image pops into your mind, right? There's the pointed hat, maybe a black cat, a broom, a cauldron. But where did that come from? Why do all of us know this very specific picture of what a witch is, and yet none of us really know the history? What if I told you it all started with beer? Today's episode is called The Wheel Witch's Brew. Today's episode is called The Real Witch's Brew. I'm Dodger, and on behalf of all of us, welcome to the fandom. So to begin, let's start all the way back in 500 AD, when everybody was living in really tiny villages and unfortunately waterborne illnesses were rampant. Fortunately, at the same time, monks had started producing a lot of ale, and so it became really common for people to just drink that instead of water. Now I know what some of you are thinking right now.
Sounds like a time period I'd like to live in.
But as a reminder, you literally couldn't drink the water. You'd probably die. Anywho, so one of the major things that monks did was help travelers and the poor. They would give them a place to stay, but they would also feed them, give them something to eat, something to drink. And again, monks are producing all kinds of ale, right? So with the rise of Christianity, there's ale all over the place. It becomes really common. Not only because of the monks, but also because it's just this cheap, robust thing to give someone. Meanwhile, because ale did have all of these nutrients and the added benefit of keeping people away from the water, homebrewing became this really awesome option for a housewife because, you know, ale is food, and the ladies take care of the food, so it was in their jurisdiction. Now, in medieval England, once they started to establish trade with the rest of Europe, y'all got you some hops, and then everything changed, because hops brought aroma, brought flavor, brought a delightful bitterness, and is actually way closer to what we know of as beer today. Not only that, but the hops are a natural preservative, and so they kind of created this fortuitous situation for the housewives that got really good at brewing. Unfortunately, ale never really tasted great. I mean, it got the job done, but beer was like the new hotness. So all of these lady brewers, otherwise known as brewsters, found themselves with kind of a lucrative hobby that just fell in their lap. Now, you might find a brewster at home with her cats, with a bubbling cauldron and something that looks suspiciously like a broom above her door, leaving the house with some beer and a very tall tit fur on her head. If this image is starting to sound a little familiar, it should. So let's start to pick apart all the pieces. Now, to be a brewster, you have to have cats around, because one of the major components of beer, I'm gesturing to my imaginary cauldron here, one of the major components of beer is malted cereal. And you know who else really loves malted cereal? Rodents. So a lot of women that were working with these food products on a daily basis for a variety of reasons would make sure that they were feeding some cats that were around the neighborhood, make them feel at home, you know, so maybe they'll kill off some vermin. Next up, I think, would be the broom, because if you're gonna be a dank brewster, you gotta have your ale stake. I know. An ale stake was basically like this really long branch, and then you would add all of these weird like twigs and things on the end, so it would basically look like a broom. And by law, if you were producing ale in your home and then selling it somewhere, you had to display this on your home somewhere, and normally it was above the door. Now, as a reminder, women still not allowed to have a business, so you gotta make sure that you're married so that you can be like, yes, he's doing it. The cauldron, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, because if you're gonna be producing a ton of beer or ale, you would probably do it in a cauldron, right? You would get like a big old pot to make it in. It's gonna be bubbling, all the elements are gonna be in there, and eventually it's gonna create this really nice thick froth that you see in a lot of, you know, witch cartoons and whatnot because of the yeast. And finally, the hat. Literally everybody had a tit fur, or a hat. But brewsters, again, because they're not necessarily supposed to have their own business, one of the ways that they would make sure that somebody would find them and be able to buy ale was to wear a very tall tit fur. And now you're probably starting to ask the big question. If this was such a normal thing for a housewife to be doing, to be making beer, you know, for their family to drink, why eventually was it so demonized? Why were these women who were good at brewing beer eventually called witches? That is a fantastic question, and here is what we know for sure. So remember how I was saying that hops made it so that ale suddenly tasted really good, smelled really good? It went from this kind of like small thing that people just did to a really lucrative business. And men really wanted to get in on that. They did not want housewives to be making their own money doing this thing. They wanted to establish their own brewing guild. And what happened is women aren't allowed legally to be in guilds. They're not even supposed to have their own businesses. So suddenly, men are the only official trusted brewers from like a business standpoint. But it simply wasn't enough to just establish themselves as the legal brewster option, because let's be real, these women were so good at it. They had been doing it for years, and men were mere small babs in the world, just tiny wee children trying to learn how to brew good beer, right? So the only thing that they could really do to crush them for good was call into question the credibility of all of the local brewsters. For example, a normal person in medieval times has no idea how you turn water into alcohol, right? Like that's just magic. And it's totally fine for a monk to be able to do it because they figured it out through divinity. But a woman at home who knows how to turn water into alcohol, that's probably the devil. Men of the brewing guild started to spread some nasty rumors.
I hear she cheats her customers. The rats didn't sneak in. She keeps them as pets. Rat people, am I right? Her home is filthy. You know why her tit fur's so big? She thinks she's better than the rest of us. Tit fur.
And so the local brewsters were slowly ostracized for their craft and given a really bad name in society, which is just like so sad because they were really, really good at it. They just wanted to have their own business. Now, as for what's been speculated, this whole brewing beer war that happened between men and women also correlated with the extreme witch hunts happening in England at the time. So, some people have said perhaps monks were the ones who said, let's make them scapegoats. They're eating into our profits. The authorities have created a situation where, you know, we're supposed to be above board on all of this. We have guilds and we need to get rid of them. So we were given this skill by God. They obviously weren't. We'll call them witches. It's just so sad to me knowing that these women were so involved in the production and creation of beer, and nobody really knows about them, and they wound up being demonized for it, you know, for just being really good at it and wanting to have a business of their own. But we can take a little solace in knowing that to this day, children and adults still every year dress up as the Brewster witches that they tried to crush. So this Halloween, drink a beer in honor of all of the witches who turned it into the industry it is today. I'm supposed to have a beer right now, but there aren't any, so this is gonna have to do. Ah, refreshing. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. Welcome to the fandom, everybody. If you enjoyed this video, please, please, please let me know. If you hated this video, that's also totally cool, but I thought that it was a really fascinating subject, and I'm glad that I had awesome people come to help me out to make this video. And yeah, have a fantastic, safe Halloween, and we'll see you next time. Woo!